Hey folks, welcome back to another video. I appreciate you joining me on another one. We've got a really fine rifle out today we're going to be taking a look at. This is the 1860 Henry rifle. It's a reproduction by the Uberti company out of Italy. They do a lot of fine reproduction work, and they specialize in the cowboy action shooting community. They do a lot of work in the Browning designs of the later 1800s, the single action armies, and of course the original Winchester family of repeating rifles. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to continue the series we started with the 1873 and its replacement, the 92. We started a little backwards towards the end of the Winchester family, but we didn't have a couple of the first models available at the time. We have them now, so we're going to start back at the very beginning with the 1860, and these are going to be a general overview of the Winchester family, nothing too in-depth history-wise. We don't have any of the original models to look at with the mechanic work. So we're going to do a very general overview of the Uberti system and how they do their rifles, some of the qualities you can expect, and how they stay true to the original designs. With that being said, we're going to start with the history portion first, and we're going to shoot each gun at the end and talk about the action. We'll get some high quality shots of it working. We'll talk about some of the mechanics and some of the finish work that Uberti does on these rifles. They're very high quality pieces, and we're happy to have a few of them in our collection to look at. So, the 1860 Henry rifle, kind of the history starts several years prior with the Volcanic Repeating Arms Company. They already had work and patents in place for a repeating rifle and pistol called the Volcanic. It was a repeater, but there was several flaws in the system. There was some overhaul needed, and it wasn't very reliable, you could say. There was several things that needed done to it to get it up to spec. Now, a couple people that worked in that factory were actually Daniel Weston and Horace Smith, who went on to form the company Smith & Wesson. Now, the most important person in the story also worked in the factory as a shop manager. His name was Benjamin Tyler Henry. He was a designer and an engineer of firearms, and unfortunately, Volcanic would never get to see their idea through because in 1857, a businessman named Oliver Winchester purchased the company after it was starting to go belly up. Bankruptcy was in question. They didn't have the money to continue their design work. They weren't putting enough firearms out the door to sustain their work. So unfortunately, the company did go belly up. Oliver Winchester purchased it. He was a businessman who had acquired a few companies, and he had some money to throw around. He renamed the company the New Haven Arms Company out of New Haven, Connecticut. And the most important thing he did with that is he continued to employ Mr. Henry, Benjamin Tyler Henry, in his factory. And Henry continued to work on the Volcanic design. I guess you could say he saw the light at the end of the tunnel. He knew there was something there, but just didn't know exactly what yet. So he continued the work on the rifle, and a few of the things he did with the Volcanic was he upgraded the toggle system. It became beefed up. He strengthened the receiver, and he added a self-cocking mechanism into the gun. So every time you work the action, not only would it eject the shell and elevate a new cartridge into the chamber, it would also extrude this steel bolt out the back, which would cock the hammer. Seems like a fine idea to me. So it was kind of threefold in its design, but it was much needed. It was a start to a new rifle design. He continued to use the open magazine at the bottom. That was a carryover from the Volcanic design. So basically, you have this open channel at the bottom of the magazine on the 1860. You have a follower with a little brass handle here. It slides up the gun, and then when you get it at the top of the barrel rotates on the assembly there, and you can load the cartridge in nose first, or nose up, bottom first. And then when you've got it fully loaded, it originally held 16 rounds. You would let the follower down, and it would put spring pressure on the cartridges. Now, if it was fully loaded, the follower would be up here, and it would work its way down, kind of like that. And it would get to the end, and the gun would be empty, and you could load it up again with 16 more cartridges. The cartridge designed around the 1860 Henry was the 44 Rimfire cartridge. There we go. The 44 Rimfire cartridge was rimfire, of course, and by today's standards, it wasn't a very powerful cartridge. It was mostly a glorified pistol cartridge. Even though it was 44 caliber, it wasn't very strong by today's standards. He incorporated a double firing pin system into the 1860 Henry to improve reliability, to make more of those shots go off, because it did have an issue with malfunctions in priming. It was a 216 grain bullet fired out of a copper case. Originally, I think they designed it for 13 grains of black powder, but then stepped it up to around 26 to 28 grains of black powder. So it had some overhaul in its history, and it became a little better over the few years that Henry was very popular. One of the other designs Henry put into the rifle was a lever catch back here. So after you fired your shot, you could twist this threaded bolt. It's got a little handle on the end, a rounded shape to grip, but you could twist that around and it would hold your lever in place. This model is a military model, so you can see it has two sling swivels on this side, one on the butt and one about halfway up the barrel right here. And this model does have a flip up aperture, so it's got a base set into the barrel, and then it's got this sliding steel piece. It's got several selections you can make based on your range, or you can flip it down for close range, and it has a cutout right there, just a rear sight notch basically. This one's chambered in 44-40. There's not very much recoil there. The first time I shot it, I was expecting a little more, but it's very, very mild. It's a very fun gun to shoot, and it's no wonder why they've become so popular with cowboy action shooting. You can get the actions really nice on these guns, slick them up pretty good, and they run really fast and really smooth. Probably the most notable feature on the 1860 rifle is the absence of a loading gate on this side and absence of a fore end up here on the barrel. Uberti just does a beautiful job with their brass work. Everything is pretty much seamless. Everything fits together so well. The bluing on the barrel looks great, and most of the time on the Ubertis, the wood is a grade A walnut, so it's fabulous woodwork, and the brass, the steel, and the wood all fit together very nicely. One thing on this model, I'm not sure if it's because it's an early import by Navy Arms or what the deal is, but it's got a high polished side on the hammer and trigger, so everything comes together beautifully. You got high polished chrome, or a chrome look right here, and then the brass, the wood, and the blue on the back of the hammer and trigger, and then the lever down here. Everything looks great. The Henry rifle remained popular long after its debut. It was used through the end of the Civil War and Indian Wars and to settle and conquer the American West. It's gained a certain stature and charisma over the years that make it still a favorite rifle because of certain characteristics that you just don't see anywhere else. It goes to show there is a place in the gun world for people like Uberti that just make reproduction rifles. It's almost like you're holding a piece of history, even though they're not original. You don't care to shoot them, to scuff them up and get them dirty, but they stay so true to the originals that it's almost like you're holding a small piece of that history in your hands when you shoot it. So we love companies like Uberti. They do really good work, and like I mentioned, over the next couple weeks we're going to look at some of the really nice rifles they have. I appreciate you watching this portion of the video. Stay tuned. In just a second we're going to be out on the range and we're going to shoot the 1860. We'll get some close-up shots of the action. We'll show the elevator system, how it works, and we'll load the gun and show how the barrel and the magazine system works here on the bottom. And we'll talk a little bit about 44-40 and how it shoots in these guns. So stay tuned. In just a second we'll be out there. As you can see, there's very little recoil with the Henry rifle. It handles the 44-40 cartridge really well. That's a 200 grain bullet traveling at about 1,250 feet per second. Compared to the original 44 rimfire cartridges, those were a 200 or 216 grain bullet, I believe, traveling at about 1,150 feet per second. So with the modern smokeless 44-40, you're getting about 100 more feet of velocity per second, and you're probably getting around 100 more actual pounds of force at target. So there's a little more there, but it's actually a very comparable cartridge because they're both pistol cartridges. The 44-40 is not a very powerful cartridge either. They're both slow moving big bullets. 44-40 is a very easy cartridge to reload, and because of that very little recoil, it makes it very popular for cowboy action shooting. You can remain on target for longer and get faster times. So that's one of the reasons Uberti chambers their lever actions in that cartridge. We'll reload real quick. I'll give you an example of the reloading technique here. So you push the follower up, this brass follower, all the way up, and the barrel spins around at the top. So these are flat nose cast lead bullets. They recommend at an angle you slide them down just so they don't get going too fast. I think this one holds 13 with the 4440 cartridges. We've got 7 or 8 in there, and then they recommend you let that follower down pretty easily so it doesn't slam into those cartridges. Probably it's not unheard of to have one go off. I've never heard of anything myself, but I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it has happened. So just general safety with the 1860 system. There's a couple different things you got to do there, but overall a very cool gun. So you see the follower is about halfway up the barrel there, and as you're shooting it will continue to move down, so you have to move your hand out of the way. After several rounds the barrel does heat up a little bit, but not a whole lot. If you want to wear gloves you can. It's never got me that bad, so I don't, but we'll take a few more shots. It's very easy shooting, easy to stay on target. It's got a half cock notch in the middle, so you can load it up, and you can actually get 14 in there, 13 in the magazine, and 1 in the chamber. Take it off half cock here. You can see I've got to position my hand. The follower is right in the sweet spot of where you would hold your hand, so you have to work around that a little bit. We'll get a look at the elevator system here. So it has a spent cartridge in the chamber. It has a little extractor hand on top of the bolt, and as you move it out, that hand fits into a notch inside the back of the receiver there, and when the case hits the back of the receiver it pops out, and that elevator system lifts a new cartridge up. Everything works on that toggle system. Works a little faster when you're actually doing it full speed. That's how that works. That's a live cartridge, but same thing. You can kind of see down inside there's a little rounded platform at the bottom, and once the magazine releases the new cartridge into the elevator, it sits on that rounded part until you get the lever right at the spot, and then it moves it up right in line with the chamber, and then the bolt is allowed to come forward, and at the same time it grabs the rim of the cartridge and pushes it into the chamber. So you fire it and then you pull it back out, it hits the receiver, flies out, and then that is the design. You can load 1 cartridge at a time in these. So if you move the lever down right before the toggle breaks and the elevator rises, you get to a point where the elevator is still at the bottom and the bolt is all the way to the rear, and you can slide in cartridges 1 at a time. The New Haven Arms Company manufactured about 14,000 original Henry rifles, and about half of those actually saw use in the American Civil War. Although neither side officially adopted them, men could go out and buy them with their own money and bring back to use on the battlefield. That's where the quotes came, like you could reload the rifle on Sunday and shoot all week. A very popular rifle used in the American Civil War was the 1861 Springfield. It was a rifled musket, and you can imagine the 16-round capacity of the Henry versus a rifled musket that you reload every time. It's a big advantage. Even though the Henry cost about 3 times more at its release, people still bought it because it was very advantageous over everything else. There was some competition at the time. The Henry was not the only repeating rifle used in the Civil War. The Spencer repeater was also a very popular choice, and they actually manufactured quite a bit more Spencer rifles than Henrys, so they saw even more use. And over time, it seems like the Henry rifle has become a little more popular. I believe the Uberti company does make a reproduction Spencer rifle as well. Those are even harder to come by, very rare, so it would be cool to have one of those for a comparison. I appreciate you watching the video. Be sure to tune in next time. We're going to look at the 1866, the Winchester rifle. We'll look at the patented loading gate that made its way on the side of the receiver and remained there until the very end. There was a bit of a barrel redesign I should say, and a fore-end that made its way onto the gun. And we'll talk about the New Haven Arms Company and its name change to Winchester, which everyone's familiar with today. We've got another beautiful Uberti example to look at, so it should be a good video, and we will see you there. So it's got